Welcome to the Deep Dive. You're here because you want to get smart, fast, on fascinating topics, and, well, that's exactly what we're about to deliver.
That's the plan.
Today, we're taking a plunge into the ingenious world of bastion forts. You might know them as Tres Italian.
Or star forts, yeah. That's probably the most common name people recognize.
Right, star forts. Now, these weren't your average medieval castles, clinging to hilltops. Forget that image.
Completely different beast. Instead of those towering stone keeps meant to stop arrows, we're looking at a revolutionary response to, well, gunpowder.
Gunpowder, exactly. And specifically the cannons that were getting much more powerful, right? Around the mid-15th century in Italy.
That's right. Those new weapons, they really changed the game. Suddenly, traditional fortifications were incredibly vulnerable.
Seriously outdated, yeah. So our mission today, yours and ours, is to really understand this huge shift in military building.
Why the star shape? What made them work?
Exactly. Why did these star shapes pop up? What made them so effective against this new artillery that was shaking things up? And, how did they impact more than just battles, even city design?
It's a big topic, definitely stretches beyond just the military side.
We'll be looking at examples from different times, different places, even some important ones in American history. Okay, let's unpack this then. What was so wrong with those classic medieval forts when cannons arrived on the scene?
Well, you picture a typical medieval castle, right? High up on a hill, usually.
Yeah, commanding view, thick walls.
Thick, tall masonry walls. Built to stop arrows, maybe guys with ladders, but cannons, that's a whole different problem.
A direct hit would do some serious damage, I imagine.
Oh, yeah. Could really smash up those straight vertical walls.
Yeah.
But maybe even worse was the problem of dead zones.
Dead zones? What do you mean?
Well, attackers could actually get quite close to the base of the walls, and because the walls were so high and straight, the defenders up top couldn't easily shoot straight down at them.
Ah, so they were sort of safe right underneath the defenders.
Relatively safe, yeah.
Yeah.
Safe enough to start digging, trying to undermine the walls. It was a massive vulnerability.
Wow. So these fortresses that seemed impenetrable suddenly had this Achilles heel. And that vulnerability, that was the spark for this whole new style, the Tres Italian.
Absolutely. It wasn't just architects getting fancy. It was a direct, practical, and pretty urgent response, especially to the French artillery.
The French cannons were particularly nasty.
They were, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
During their campaigns in Italy, late 15th, early 16th centuries, they were basically demonstrating very loudly how useless the old designs had become against modern firepower.
Okay, so the old playbook was useless. Enter the Star Fort. What were the key ideas behind this new design? It looks so different. Low, sprawling, star-shaped instead of tall and imposing.
It was a complete rethink, a
Mhm.
radical shift. The main idea moved away from just having high passive barriers.
Right, like just a big wall.
Exactly. Towards creating lower, more spread out structures, and crucially, structures designed for active defense.
Active defense. And those pointy bits, the bastions, they're the most obvious feature.
The triangular bastions at the corners, yeah. They weren't just for looks, not at all. They were the key to eliminating those dangerous dead zones we were just talking about.
Okay, so how did they do that? By allowing defenders to shoot sideways along the walls. Is that the enfilade fire concept?
Precisely. Enfilade or flanking fire. Imagine standing inside one bastion. Its shape lets you fire cannons or muskets right along the face of the connecting wall, the curtain wall.
Okay, I can picture that.
And the bastion next door can do the same for the wall on its side. So you get these overlapping, interlocking fields of fire.
Ah, so anyone trying to get close to the main wall would be hit from the front and the side.
Exactly. From multiple angles. It made approaching the base of the walls incredibly hazardous.
Yeah.
Basically, it wiped out those safe spots.
That makes a lot of sense. And you mentioned they were lower and the walls were thicker. Another response to cannons.
Absolutely. Lower profile means a smaller target, harder to hit accurately from a distance, and making the walls substantially thicker, often backing them with huge amounts of packed earth, well, that helped them absorb the impact.
Absorb it how? Better than stone.
Much better. Instead of shattering and collapsing like a traditional stone wall might, the cannonball's energy would dissipate into the earthworks. It was much more resilient.
Okay, and what about the ditches? They always seem to have these massive ditches, sometimes filled with water, and that slope outside the ditch.
The glassy.
The glasses. Well, the wide ditch itself is an obvious obstacle. Slows down attackers, keeps them under fire for longer.
Makes sense. Keeps infantry away.
And the glasses, that gentle earthen slope running up from the outer edge of the ditch, that was clever. It was designed to deflect cannonballs aimed low. at the base of the main wall.
Oh, so it would make the ball skip up or lose energy?
Kind of, yeah. Or it forced the enemy artillery to aim higher, making their shots less effective against the most vulnerable parts of the wall. It protected the foundations. It really sounds like a layered system, thinking about every possible angle of attack. And you mentioned even more layers. Ravelins, tenae, hornworks. Sounds complicated.
It could get very complex. That's the principle of defense in depth. These were all different types of outworks, extra fortifications built outside the main fort body.
Okay, so what did something like a ravelin do?
A ravelin was typically a triangular or V-shaped structure, often sitting in the middle of the ditch, right in front of the curtain wall between two bastions.
Okay.
It helped break up attacking formations, provided another platform for guns to fire from, and shielded the main wall behind it.
And tenae, hornworks.
Tenae were sort of low walls connecting things, offering extra protection right in front of the curtain wall. Hornworks and crownworks were much larger, more complex extensions pushed further out to cover vital ground or approaches. Sometimes even completely detached forts were part of the system.
Wow. It sounds like assaulting one of these would be an absolute nightmare.
That was the idea. An incredibly daunting, costly, and bloody prospect for any attacker. Defense in depth.
And building them must have been a massive undertaking. What did they mostly use? You mentioned earth, but surely some stone.
Earth was primary, actually, often dug out right from the ditch excavations. It was cheap, readily available, and as we said, great at absorbing impacts.
Okay.
Brick was also very common, better than solid stone in some ways, because when hit, brick tends to crumble rather than shattering into big, lethal chunks.
Ah, less dangerous fragmentation. Makes sense. Stone might be used for facings or key points, though.
Sometimes, yeah, especially for durability or structural elements. But the bulk was often earth and brick. Building these things was a huge investment, a massive drain on resources for whoever commissioned them.
I bet. So that star shape, it really was functional, wasn't it? Not just a cool look that came from having bastions.
Oh, entirely functional. The geometry was everything. The angles of the bastions, the length of the curtain walls, it was all carefully calculated.
Calculated for those interlocking fields of fire.
Exactly. To ensure every piece of wall could be swept by fire from an adjacent bastion, and that the bastions themselves were protected. The little indentations at the base of each bastion point, the shoulders and flanks, held cannons sheltered from direct fire, but perfectly placed to rake the walls.
Right, so cannons in Bastion A cover the wall leading to Bastion B, and cannons in Bastion B cover the wall leading to A, and they both protect each other's flanks.
You've got it. A deadly crossfire. That enfilade capability was the heart of the system.
And there's more, something about a covered way.
Yes, the covered way or covert way. That was a protected pathway running along the outer edge of the ditch, just behind the glacis.
Protected how?
It usually had a small embankment on the outside, shielding defenders walking along it from direct enemy fire and observation.
And what was its purpose? Moving troops around.
That, yes, but also for active defense. Defenders could mass there for counterattacks or fire muskets over the glacis to keep enemy infantry pinned down, stop them setting up ladders or digging. It allowed them to contest the ground right outside the main defenses.
So it wasn't just about sitting back and taking hits, it was about fighting back at every stage.
Very much so. Challenging the enemy artillery, denying them good positions, actively pushing back. Much more dynamic than older siege warfare.
And the overall lower profile and larger footprint compared to medieval castles, that was part of this defense in depth too.
Yes, absolutely. An attacker breaching one outer layer didn't suddenly win. They just found themselves facing another layer of defenses, still under fire from multiple directions. It was a grueling process to fight through.
Even the gun positions inside, were they designed differently?
Often, yes. They'd be heavily protected from the front, obviously, to keep the guns safe from enemy bombardment,
Right.
but sometimes quite open towards the inside of the fort.
Why open? Wouldn't that be dangerous?
It helped dissipate the immense amount of smoke from firing black powder cannons quickly. And maybe cynically, if the enemy did capture that gun position, being open to the inside made it harder for them to turn the captured gun against the rest of the fort.
Huh. That's clever, in a grim way. It really sounds like every detail was thought through, almost like architectural problem-solving for war. I read somewhere they used basic tools like ropes and stakes to lay out these complex shapes.
They did. Basic surveying techniques. It highlights how practical geometry was applied directly to warfare. Simple tools for sophisticated results.
Okay, so the theory sounds brilliant. The design is ingenious. But did they actually work in practice? on the battlefield.
Oh, they definitely worked. There are some key historical examples. Pisa, back in 1500, is often cited as one of the first big tests.
What happened there?
The French were bombarding Pisa, and the old medieval walls were crumbling. The defenders quickly threw up earthen ramparts behind the breaches.
Using the new principles.
Essentially, yeah. Low-sloping earthworks. And they found these makeshift defenses were way more resistant to the cannonballs than the original stone walls.
Blah.
Harder for infantry to climb was a real eye-opener.
So Earth proved its worth early on. Any other major successes?
Padua in 1509 is another classic. An engineer monk, Fra Giocondo, oversaw tearing down medieval sections and building a new system-wide ditch. Low ramparts, crucially, with low-set gun ports for flanking fire along the ditch.
And the attackers.
French and their allies. Their cannons didn't do much damage to the low earthworks, and the flanking fire from the ditch level was devastating to their assaults. They took heavy losses and eventually had to give up.
So the very people pushing cannon tech were finding it hard to beat these new defenses. Did this influence things beyond Italy, like at sea?
Definitely. In the Mediterranean, these forts were key in slowing down Ottoman expansion. The Ottomans failed to take Corfu in 1537 and again in 1716, largely thanks to its modern bastion defenses.
Rhodes fell eventually, though, didn't it?
It did in 1522, after a very long and bloody siege. But Rhodes already had some updated defenses, which made it a much harder fight for the Ottomans than earlier conquests. It showed the cost of attacking even partially modernized fortifications.
And Malta, 1565. That's probably the most famous siege involving these forts, isn't it?
Absolutely iconic. Fort St. Elmo in particular. It was relatively small, maybe hastily built compared to others.
But it held out for ages, right?
Over a month, under relentless Ottoman bombardment. It did eventually fall, but the Ottomans suffered huge casualties taking it, and critically, it bought vital time.
Time for what?
Time for the relief force from Sicily to arrive. Without St. Elmo's stubborn defense, the whole island might have fallen much faster. The Star Fort design was absolutely crucial to the outcome.
And they remained effective for a long time, even into the 18th century.
They did. Corfu's fortifications were still considered formidable and posed a major challenge during a siege as late as 1799.
So a proven technology with a real impact on history. This ties into that idea of the military revolution, doesn't it? How do star forts fit into that theory?
Right, the military revolution thesis. Historians like Michael Roberts, and especially Geoffrey Parker, argue that there were fundamental shifts in European warfare in the early modern period.
And Parker saw the Trace Italienne as a key driver.
Exactly. His argument, put simply, was that these forts were so tough to crack.
Required massive resources to even try.
Precisely. That warfare shifted towards long, drawn-out sieges rather than decisive open battles. To conduct these sieges effectively, you needed much, much larger armies.
So the forts themselves forced armies to grow bigger.
That was Parker's contention. He argued that in areas with these forts, siege warfare dominated, army sizes ballooned, and the whole nature of war changed. The fortifications dictated the strategy.
That's a powerful argument. The building dictates the battle. Is that view widely accepted?
It's been hugely influential, no doubt. But Parker's specific emphasis on fortifications as the sole or primary driver of army growth, that's been debated quite a bit.
Oh, what are the criticisms?
Other historians point to different factors, things like better state administration or efficient tax collection allowing bigger armies, changes in tactics unrelated to sieges. They argue it's more complex than just blaming the forts for bigger armies.
Okay, so the forts were definitely a major factor in changing warfare, but maybe not the only factor driving up army size. Still a huge impact. Now let's bring it across the Atlantic. Why don't we see medieval castles dotting the landscape in the US or Canada?
Well, simply put, by the time Europeans were seriously colonizing North America, medieval castles were already obsolete technology back in Europe.
Because of cannons.
Exactly. Why spend a fortune building something that the latest artillery could batter down relatively easily? It just didn't make military sense.
Right, but they did build forts here, didn't they? They needed defenses.
Oh, absolutely. And crucially, many of the forts they built were in the Trace Italienne style. They brought the latest military architecture with them.
Any famous examples?
Fort McHenry in Baltimore is a great one. Finished just after 1800, it famously survived that British bombardment in 1814.
The one that inspired the Star-Spangled Banner.
The very same. And its ability to withstand that naval gunfire, that was thanks to its design principles, rooted right back in 16th century Italy.
Wow, so that song exists in part because of a star fort design.
You could argue that, yeah, it shows the endurance of the design. And this wasn't just an American thing. Thinkers and engineers like Michelangelo, Peruzzi, Scamozzi in Italy refined these ideas, and they spread worldwide.
So the principles traveled. Any other notable North American examples of this style?
Fort Union out in New Mexico is interesting. It started differently more for logistics against Native American tribes.
Right.
But during the Civil War, facing the potential threat of Confederate cannons, they redesigned it, turned it into an 8-pointed star fort, mostly using earthworks with bastions and demilunes. Shows adaptation to a new threat.
Adapting the old principles? What about older ones?
Fort Ticonderoga, the more traditional masonry, was hugely strategic in the Revolution. Capturing its cannons was key for Washington and Boston, and Castillo de San Marcos in St. Augustine, Florida.
That's a really old Spanish one, right?
Yes, an early North American bastion system. And built with coquina, that local shellstone.
What was special about coquina?
It had this amazing property of absorbing cannonball impacts rather than shattering, like the earthworks, but in stone form. Ingenious use of local materials within the bastion framework.
Fascinating how they adapted. Now, you hinted earlier that these forts influenced more than just battles. How did they affect society, maybe city planning?
Well, military needs often drive technology, right? Building these massive, complex forts pushed construction techniques forward.
Sure, engineering challenges.
And beyond that, security has always shaped settlements. Think about how many old cities grew up around or within defensive walls. That need for safety is fundamental.
Like roads, you mentioned, where the city and the defenses were sort of one and the same.
Exactly. Roads is a prime example. You have the massive walls, towers, gates.
Yeah.
But inside, the street layout, the grid patterns for moving troops, the placement of important buildings, even narrow winding streets to confuse invaders, it's all intertwined. Military needs shaping the urban form.
So the fort wasn't just in the city, it shaped the city.
In many cases, yes. The defensive perimeter often dictated the city's growth and internal structure. There's even a modern parallel drawn sometimes.
Oh, what's that?
The Pentagon. Think about its impact on Arlington, Virginia. Transportation networks surrounding businesses, development patterns. Its sheer presence as a massive military hub has profoundly shaped the urban landscape around it.
Huh. I never thought of it quite like that. A modern fort shaping its environment. And over time, these places gain cultural meaning too.
Definitely. They become landmarks, tourist sites, symbols of history or resilience, like the Great Wall of China built for defense, now a global icon. Forts hold memory.
So a really broad legacy. But like all military tech, star forts eventually faded. What made them obsolete?
Primarily further advances in artillery in the 19th century, especially the development of high explosive shells.
How did those change things?
Instead of just battering walls, these shells could be lobbed over the walls in high arcs and explode inside the fort. The intricate geometry of bastions didn't help much against shells raining down from above.
Ah, so bypassing the clever angles.
Exactly. It negated a lot of the design advantages.
Yeah.
Military engineers shifted towards simpler, often polygonal fort designs, focusing more on massively thick concrete and dispersed gun emplacements that were harder to target.
And then the 20th century arrived. Tanks, airplanes.
Right. Tanks could bypass fixed defenses, airplanes could bomb them from above. The whole concept of large static fortifications lost a lot of its strategic importance in major wars.
Seems like the end of the line for fixed forts.
Mostly, yes.
Yeah.
Although, there was a mention, quite intriguingly, of French engineers apparently using star fort principles in Mali relatively recently, early 21st century.
Really? Star forts making a comeback?
Not the massive structures, but perhaps the core ideas interlocking fields of fire, layered defense, might still have value in certain specific contexts, maybe against less technologically advanced opponents or in irregular warfare. It's a surprising little footnote.
Wow. That is unexpected. So the basic geometry of defense might still echo.
It suggests the fundamental principles might be more enduring than the specific structures themselves. While the great star forts are historical monuments now, the thinking behind them, adaptation, layered security, strategic positioning, that still resonates.
Well, this has been a fascinating deep dive. We've gone from why medieval castles failed to the genius of the Tres Italian, its geometry, its materials,
How it fundamentally changed warfare, influenced sieges, army sizes.
its journey to North America, shaping places like Fort McHenry and Castillo de San Marcos, its impact on cities, and even its eventual obsolescence, mostly.
It's a huge story, really, a testament to ingenuity under pressure.
Absolutely. So here's something to chew on as we wrap up. Warfare has changed immensely, obviously. No more cannonballs against stone and earth in the same way. But think about those core principles: layered defense, eliminating blind spots, strategic design.
Can we see echoes of that thinking today?
Exactly. In modern security systems, maybe. Airport security checkpoints, cybersecurity architecture, even how we design public spaces for safety. What are the new cannons we face now?
Cyber attacks, maybe? Misinformation? Climate change impacts?
Could be any of those. And how are those threats shaping our modern fortifications, whether physical or virtual? It's that intersection of history, technology, and design. It's still happening all around us. Worth thinking about.
Definitely. The principles of defense and adaptation are timeless, even if the forms change drastically. This dive might be over, but the topic certainly offers more to explore.
Thanks for joining us on the deep dive. Until our next exploration, keep digging deeper into the world around you.